Hello, it's Monday night. This is TyskySour. I'm Michael Walker, at Michael J. S. Walker on Twitter. We have bad news for you today. Aaron Bastani is a bad guy. He cancelled on us at 4 minutes to 8 p.m. because he's going to be on Newsnight. So check him out at 10:30, but check us out first. And to replace a bad guy... To replace a bad guy, we've got an even badder girl. Our very own Ash Sarkar. How's it going?
It's going well. I was actually brought on to make TyskySour less laddie.
But you're going to make it more laddie, aren't you?
Yeah, because people don't understand I'm the biggest lad in Navarra, so...
I think you're going to make it more laddie, but your presence might make me camper. That's just sometimes what happens.
I'm really sorry. If anything, it amplifies the heteronormativity in a weird way.
Ooh, I don't even understand that one. You've blown my mind, Ash.
For a tenner, I'll blow more. No!
Ooh. Naughty.
Move on.
We've got a lot to talk about today. We're going to start with the very serious issue of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, which blew up over the weekend because it came to light that Corbyn had commented under what was definitely an anti-Semitic mural that it should stay up. Maybe we can get that image up. Not a particularly nice image, but it is worth having that context. And this became a big controversy over the weekend, which culminated today in the Board of Jewish Deputies and the Jewish Leadership Council calling a demonstration outside of the Houses of Parliament in Parliament Square. Corbyn's responses started out pretty poor. The first one was that obviously the mural was anti-Semitic, but I defended it on freedom of speech grounds, which is incoherent because he said it should have come down, but I defended it on freedom of speech grounds. His statements got better and better and better as the weekend went on until we ended up with quite a good letter today. So the letter today includes, I'll quote a little bit of it. While the forms of anti-Semitism expressed on the far right are easily detectable, such as Holocaust denial, there needs to be a deeper understanding of what constitutes anti-Semitism in the Labour movement. Sometimes this evil takes familiar forms. The idea of Jewish bankers and capitalists exploiting the workers of the world is an old anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that was long ago and rightly described as the socialism of fools. He goes on to say how the Labour Party hasn't done enough to stamp it out and it will get better.
I mean, I'm inclined to agree with the sense of it's much easier to identify anti-Semitism with the far right for really obvious reasons, which is you go to secondary school in this country, then you learn about the Holocaust. Probably not as fully or in as much complexity as you ought to, but you learn the basics of it. And so that's fairly entrenched within the political imagination. But it really took a long time for even me to reflect on aspects of my own upbringing and to identify certain tropes or certain ways of talking as anti-Semitic. So when I was at school, there was a kind of culture of anti-Semitism in the playground, which never was intended as attacking. That doesn't mean that it wasn't incredibly harmful for Jewish students. Obviously it was. But it was seen as somehow innocuous because in everyone's mind, anti-Semitism is something which belongs to Germany in the 1930s and 40s. It's not something that is a contemporary political concern at all. And also because it had all these associations with money, and the school that I went to, people didn't really have very much money, Enfield County, bang, bang, hold tight, is that it was seen as somehow a compliment. Even if it was derogatory, it was seen somehow as a compliment at the same time. So these are kind of images and tropes that we've all been steeped with. And, this is in fairly cosmopolitan North London, and that was still the case. So I can really understand, because lots of people have looked at this image and gone, well, I don't really, they need it explained to them. And I think that's because we don't have such an instant recognition of anti-Semitism when the tropes are more familiar as to when they're kind of consigned to a particular period of history. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I think it also does need to be explained to people, actually. So when Corbyn first put his apology on Facebook on, I can't remember if it was Friday or Saturday, and there were quite a lot of comments underneath it sort of saying like, oh, you shouldn't have apologised, it wasn't anti-Semitic. And I was like, oh, this is... Aaron's...
You restarted?
Yeah. Oh, I thought you weren't going to be on it because you're doing Newsnight.
So
Aaron
has
Bastani is
just
in the building.
wandered in to displace me when I've... I'm
All right.
so sorry, man.
No,
Michael is so bad at WhatsApp. You always misunderstand what I'm saying.
Okay, so Aaron was actually just saying he's going to be late. So what are you doing? You hanging around?
I'll go.
What? We just wrote R.I.P. Dr. Bastano on the chalkboard.
Okay.
See you. From the gym, man. I did like a half an hour arms workout.
Well, you...
Only half an hour arms workout.
Read properly.
Right.
God, he's meant to get LSE now. See you later.
Uh-oh, Daddy's home.
Yeah,
We're in
he's,
wicked trouble now.
That was dramatic. You didn't see Aaron just walk through the door saying that actually he was going to come on the show before Newsnight, but had sent me a misleading WhatsApp message. So I said, are you going to be here on time? And he said, no, I'm on Newsnight. So I was like, oh, he's on Newsnight. But I mean, he could have come in and he could have sat... Anyway, it doesn't matter. What were we talking about? Where were we?
We were talking about the culture of anti-Semitism and why you don't recognise it when it's more familiar to you. And you were saying... Well, people do
I was
need
surprised at
explained
how
to
many
them.
people saw that mural and without any viciousness or without any hatred of Jewish people, or didn't actually even really perceive the people around the table as Jewish. They just thought, well, it's just capitalists. So I think the reason it's anti-Semitic is because of how it links with a particular idea of Jewish people and a particular history of anti-Semitism. And that does need to be explained to people. It's almost unfair. I mean, for Corbyn, it's not much of an excuse because he's been on the left for decades. He definitely knows a lot about international politics and the vagaries of different kinds of racism.
The thing is, like, none of this conversation that we're having is excusing Corbyn's personal idiocy in leaving that comment. I think what we're doing is trying to think about how we need to go about unpicking that culture of anti-Semitism that we are all a part of and have all been steeped in. Like,
it's more a culture of tolerance of anti-Semitism then. I mean, obviously there are some viciously anti-Semitic people on the left.
And a lack of recognition. I think it's because it's seen as having been dealt with and being over that a blind eye is turned to it. And I think that that's why there's so much tolerance for certain tropes and certain images. I mean, the thing is, I don't want to say compared to other forms of racism because that's also not true. There's a hell of a lot of tolerance for those images as well. I think maybe one of the things that we can look at is the way in which this is identified as particularly a problem on the Labour left. And it's not turned into a moment of reflection for our political culture at large. Because I was looking at tweets from Nick Timothy, Theresa May's former advisor, who was, really going hard on Jeremy Corbyn for anti-Semitism. And I was like, dude, literally last month, you penned an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory for The Telegraph about George Soros. He was responsible for the Citizens of Nowhere speech, which was really drawing hard on those rootless cosmopolitan tropes. And yet he's quite happy to use this as a political weapon rather than, again, a moment for reflection. And I just think that's really insulting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one reason why the issue has got so confused. I think, one, because there isn't much education about how different forms of racism manifest, but also that things do get used. Mm-hmm. So I mean, it's completely the wrong attitude to dismiss any claim of anti-Semitism. Oh, as it must be a smear. I mean, you have to look at a case-by-case basis, and you have to take really, really seriously if anyone says anti-Semitism has taken place, and look into that and make a judgment for yourself. But it is it's not credible to suggest that every time someone's claimed anti-Semitism about the Labour left, it's been true. And there's two really good articles by Jamie Stern-Weiner. One's on Open Democracy and one's on his blog, where he really forensically goes through all the different claims that were made before the local elections in 2016 about anti-Semitism in the Labour Party and there being institutional anti-Semitism that was all over the place. And he looked at each of the claims and said, actually, where anti-Semitism did happen, people were excluded within 48 hours. And in many of these cases, it was potentially misjudged what was said, but the idea that person was a outright anti-Semite seems a bit over the top.
I mean, that phrase, the socialism of fools, that Corbyn used in his statement, I think is really evocative and really important. And that's also why, I imagine there will be some anti-Semitic fraff in the comments under this video, in which case I advise you, just please, I beg, log off. Don't need this here. But in terms of anti-Semitism which is masked as anti-capitalism or is couched in terms of criticism of Israel, which obviously is not in and of itself anti-Semitic. And actually anti-Semitism, I think, plays into the hands of a lot of the aims of the Israeli state, which is to say there's only one right way to be Jewish, and that's to commit yourself totally to this expansionist imperial project. And, whether you like it or not, you're tied to this place. It really...
well, the two exist off one another, don't they?
Yeah.
So sort of like extreme far-right Zionism and anti-Semitism somewhat make each other
well, there's
stronger.
there's a mutually reinforcing logic, because then what it says is that Jews in the diaspora don't have a place here, despite Jewish communities in Europe being, centuries and centuries old and having really shaped really integral parts of our culture. There's also a really long-standing Jewish community in Kolkata. They're traditionally like the chutney making community. And I remember one time asking my grandma, I was like, oh, but how did they get there in terms of what waves of migration and the period of history? And she was like, what do you want to know? The 41 bus? What can I tell you? I was like, thanks for that period of history, grandma, the 41 bus. That's not useful.
What do you think? You obviously talk about racism on the left a lot. Mm-hmm. What do you think are the three things that the Labour Party could do to try and limit, educate, and remove basically anti-Semitism or all other forms of discrimination from its base?
I think one, more rigorous vetting, because I think if you can tell if someone has liked a tweet from the Green Party in 2013, you should be able to root out anti-Semites and other forms of racists from your party with the same ease. I think that there needs to be a programme which is led by BAME Labour, which isn't just for the BAME membership, in which you can unpick lots of this kind of unconscious racism and unconscious anti-Semitism. Because for the most part, people that hold deeply Islamophobic views or deeply anti-black views don't perceive those views to be Islamophobic or anti-black. And it's the same with anti-Semitism. So I think that people need to have that moment of stepping back from their politics and critically assessing them. And then I think the third thing would just do some of this learning publicly, right? Politics is about change, and it's about taking on new information and adapting to that information. And all of us are on that journey one way or another. So I think encouraging that is really important. I also think more broadly, in this period where the left is being revived, we need to acknowledge the fact that anti-Semitism will be a part of it, not just because it's a part of society, but because with the lack of political education in this country, and political education in this country is shit, that instead of critical thinking, what we have is conspiratorial thinking. And conspiratorial thinking obviously goes hand in hand with anti-Semitism. Yeah. So more critical theory.
More critical... Oh, I was with you until you said more critical theory, and then I was like, oh man, I'm not reading any critical theory. Apologies, yeah. We're not just going to send loads of Labour members copies of...
introducing the written word to Michael Walker is like trying to get a cat in a bath.
Yeah. Send me a podcast. maybe every Labour member could get delivered a podcast to their mobile phone.
A really, a kind of audiobook of Edward Said on the shared historical origins of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism.
I think political education is a big one because, one of the reasons why anti-Semitism, there's two issues. One, there's not seeing it and tolerating it, and the other is having some sort of conspiracy theory which leaks very easily into anti-Semitism. And I think the latter comes a lot out of movements on the online, far right, but also the far left, where there weren't many political institutions to be a part of where you could ascertain what's a good argument and what's a bad argument. So you have lots of people going down rabbit holes on the internet. We were talking about Zeitgeist earlier, which is a movie which was incredibly impactful in the noughties, which basically painted a picture of a new world order where they thought everything in politics could be explained by bankers and financiers wanting to create a global government to control everyone.
Yeah.
Which obviously invoked the Rothschilds a lot, and obviously is quite an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. But And one way to counter that is to say sort of like, look, the consequences of this kind of theory are awful. Like, look, historically, when people have sort of painted this as the explanation of why political developments happen, but also there's a much better explanation to why world events happen. And there's this small cabal of people running it all, trying to make a world government.
Have you heard of this writer? I don't know if you've come across him before, Karl Marx.
Oh.
See the really smooth transition
Yeah,
into
that's
replace
good.
conspiratorial thinking with critical thinking via Marx.
You want structural thinking.
Oh, you want structural thinking, you do. I also think that there's something quite specific. I've spoken about this on Novara FM before, but it's probably worth raising here, is that in terms of within young, politically aware Muslims, really, and it's something that I've seen and come across, and I've probably reproduced this myself in the past, is that there's a kind of counterpoint to the idea of the ummah. So the ummah being the kind of, global community of Muslims, and there's kind of an understanding of shared oppression. Often that's articulated in terms of solidarity with Palestinians. Nothing inherently wrong with that at all. I think that's a really powerful image of solidarity. But in terms of, again, that conspiratorial rather than critical thinking, there is a kind of, doppelganger to that, which is like, the kind of international Zionist conspiracy, kind of a repeat of this 1930s Jewish bankers kind of stuff, which is almost like the flip side of it. And in terms of like talking to people who, they haven't had like a lot of like political education, and their politicized knowledge has kind of been distorted in this way, is that these two things are really intimately connected. So I think that when you're doing that process of political education and starting conversations, if you go in with the broad brushes of anti-Semitism is bad, well, yeah, everyone can agree with that. You have to go in really deep and unpick the nitty-gritty and think about the culturally and socially specific ways in which these tropes and images kind of adhere in the imagination. Do you know what I mean? And there are complex reasons for that. And I think that's worth getting your hands dirty to get into.
We're going to move from a serious topic to a really dumb topic now.
I love dumb topics.
Which is Chicken Coup 2.0.
Because you were talking about falling down an internet hole. And I fell into a K-hole and went back into 2016 because apparently there's another like leadership challenge brewing.
It's happening again, baby.
It's happening again.
Well, actually, no, it's worse than a leadership challenge brewing, because they know this is the Labour backbenchers. They know they're not going to be able to win any kind of leadership election. So what it seems like they're going to try and do is at any possibility undermine Labour in elections, so that ultimately, I don't know what their idea. I suppose Wes Streeting's quite young, so he thinks probably. Yeah, he must be in his early 30s.
That's not
so
young.
I suppose he thinks that if Labour flop for 10 years, then maybe in 10 years' time, people will be sick of the left and he can become leader of the opposition or something like that. Some people would prefer to be a shadow cabinet minister in 10 years' time than a backbencher of the government in 4, is what I'm guessing. Anyway, what happened, you'll probably know this already if you were watching, was Owen Smith on Friday wrote an article saying that Labour should be backing a second referendum and should be thinking about remaining in the EU to protect the Good Friday Agreement. This was a complete abdication of collective responsibility. That's not Labour's policy. When you're in the shadow cabinet, you're not supposed to write op-eds, which are completely counter to the party's policy. He got fired, and this was where the Labour Rights WhatsApp group really came into play, and they all started tweeting fairly identical things about what a brave man Owen Smith was to stand by his principles.
And they were saying that, well, Jeremy Corbyn, as a backbencher, which is a key difference, was notoriously rebellious. So, he was a man of integrity. Won't he respect integrity in Owen Smith? Which is just complete faff, because like you said, cabinet collective responsibility. And this whole notion of it being a kind of Stalinist purge, tightening, the left's grip, is that, well, man like Chris Williamson, being loyal and a leftist and pro-Corbyn, didn't save him. He got lenged.
They didn't call that a Stalinist purge.
No one really mentioned it apart from us.
Yeah.
But
we didn't even call it a Stalinist purge, and we quite like the guy.
Yeah, we love him.
Yeah. One response, a very crisp response. We know the Labour right are very good at media. It's Chuka Amuna from his wardrobe. Can we watch that, Gary?
Will Gary let us?
I think he's going to put it on.
Please.
Anyway, Chuka Amuna thinks that it's It's very problematic that Owen Smith was sacked from his position.
What's
because
happened to Chuka Ramona's visuals?
Shadow.
Because
Well,
he
we're
used to
about
be
to see
really
they got poor.
slick.
I think actually it was always. Is it because I think he painted an image of himself as being slick, but I've never actually seen anything with him in that is slick.
UK Garage Chuka was slick.
Did you ever see him then? Maybe he looked like shit.
I seen a picture of him DJing and he looked great.
Oh, really?
He looked phenomenal.
Okay, yeah. All right. Fair dues.
You know, and he looked like a man who would like play a bit of underground garage as well, not just like Shanks and Bigfoot.
You think?
I think.
I've heard about Wild Nights in Ibiza.
Uh,
I reckon he probably was quite fun, but now the problem is
It's a
he always
great
just
shame.
sounds like he's talking
Owen
down
has
to
been
primary
a
school children.
superb Northern
Yeah.
Ireland,
So when
shadow
I remember in the first
Secretary
leadership
of
election when
State,
Corbyn looked like he was about to win,
his
Chuck already
views on the
scored
European
and
Union,
decided not
his
to stand anymore
advocacy
for a
of a
mysterious reason.
people's vote
He went
on the Brexit
on
deal,
Newsnight and he was saying,
his advocacy
"What's going on
of
now
us staying
is
in the
Labour
single
members
market and the
are
customs
throwing their
union were
toys
vocal
out of the
positions he held
pram."
before his appointment
And he's
in
sort of
June
like looking
last
down the
year.
camera like he's sort of
So
telling
it's
off
quite bizarre
300,000
that he
people
should
for
be
joining the
sacked from
party
his
and wanting a
post.
socialist
See,
leader.
Only
I'd
for
like it to be like,
expressing
hold
views
time,
which
my
were
man,
well
Owen
known about
Smith.
Yeah.
before his
Resigning with
appointment, but also
integrity.
for expressing
Inside.
views
Like, that'd be great.
which
Good
the
while it
overwhelming majority of our members
Last melt in
and also
cabinet.
our
I
voters
genuinely,
support.
if there was a leadership election and UK Garage Chuka was standing, it would make me doubt my socialist principles.
No, come on. He's
100%.
blown it.
100%. I've got no integrity. I can be swayed by things like that.
Oh, it's not coming up, is
I
it?
don't think we're going to get the video.
Gary, shout back to me. Oh, okay, put it on.
It's a great shame. Owen has been a superb Northern Ireland Shadow Secretary of State. His views on the European Union, his advocacy of a people's vote on the Brexit deal, his advocacy of us staying in the single market and the customs union were vocal positions he held before his appointment in June of last year. So it's quite bizarre that he should be sacked from his post, not only for expressing views which were well known about before his appointment, but also for expressing views which the overwhelming majority of our members and also our voters support.
Why would you do that?
What, film it on your phone in your wardrobe?
Yeah.
On your iPad? I mean, live to Newsnight as well. Couldn't they sort him out with something? He lives in London. He could have gone to the studio.
Like, what are
They did it
you?
from
Like
his ward.
Erdogan, like facing down a coup? Go to the studio, man.
Yeah, weird guy. I love the way he's speaking for the majority of members as well. The majority of members want a second referendum and they want to stay. Like, the majority of members think you're a melt.
Oh my God. But the thing is, right? And so I've been thinking about this a lot because I voted Remain because I thought that the other side was full of batshit racists, and I still maintain my position.
Oh, you can't. What? Not the 52%. You mean the leadership?
I'm talking about Vote
We're
Leave.
building bridges.
Vote
Okay.
Leave was led by batshit racists. And if you want to say, like, Ash, are you willing to be 52% of the country? I would be more than 52% of the country with a few drinks in me. So,
Okay.
like, you know, don't expect me to be conciliatory. And I think that I still have some doubts, and I'm yet to be convinced on aspects of the Lexit position. However, the Remain position that a second referendum would overturn the result, I think, is broadly a fantasy. So the data that was released by YouGov, I think, this week showed that any polling which shows like a little swing to Remain, like if the whole thing was replayed, isn't Leave voters changing their mind. It's people that didn't vote coming out and voting Remain. And the problem with that is then you've also got a load of people who didn't vote who might look at that rerun and think, well, fundamentally that's anti-democratic. And you've got a much more significant number than people who voted Leave switching to Remain, of people that voted Remain switching to Leave for those self-same reasons. So this idea that you can somehow replay the referendum without changing any of the material or social conditions which produced the referendum in the first place is batshit to me. Batshit.
But Ash, what if it was all a conspiracy and it was fixed?
Who did it? Was it the Stonecutters?
It was Cambridge Analytica.
Ooh.
Yeah. Although it wasn't Cambridge Analytica. So this was the other big story of the weekend, which has got many Remainers up in arms saying the vote was illegitimate. And it does seem like a couple of dodgy things went on. But fundamentally, what's happened is that Vote Leave campaign, they directed some money to a different group that was supposed to be separate, got them to spend the money when actually Vote Leave were involved. So that was Believe. You'll know Believe from having the guy who spoke out, who we both think's kind of hot.
You think he's hot? You're putting words in my mouth now.
I think he's hot, and I followed him on Twitter, and then I watched the video where he just like creeped me out, and I unfollowed.
He's got you know what? He's an angular haircut on decent bone structure, which to less refined eyes adds up to hot. But I have much
You've
higher
got
standards.
real
than
high
that.
standards.
I've got real high standards.
We can't all have as standards as high as you, Ash.
Yeah, no.
Maybe after we've been on Question Time, that's when you can get a bit more picky.
The stench of desperation.
Did that get you any?
What? My DMs were wild.
Really?
But the thing
anyone good?
I'm not at liberty to say, but yes.
What was the percentage of like abuse versus you were great?
From my mum or like the internet?
The whole UK population.
Okay.
The 3 million people that tuned in.
Lots of people were really nice. Most people were really nice, I think. But I've also changed my settings so I see less racism. So I was just like, there's like a template of like maybe 4 different racist tweets that you'll get, and everything else is a variation on those 4. So, you know,
So how do you do that? You block particular words?
I just sort of like have a quality filter. I block particular words, and I've just like muted loads of accounts.
Yeah.
I mute rather than block, because then you're just like, you are just screaming into the abyss and I'm not listening, which is more satisfying.
All right,
But going back to the guy who is just a fancy haircut on
let's get him up on the
bone structure.
Let's get him up on the screen, Gary. It's not a video. It's just this guy.
See? Look, he's got good cheekbones. But what he's done there is shave his beard into a shape which accentuates the jawline, which isn't really there. Can you see?
Oh, that is true, actually.
Yeah, see,
And they've done. It's good lighting as well.
and it's a good fade. He's got a good fade, and you know,
I respect a good fade.
I respect a good fade. I wouldn't, if you chose to wed him, I wouldn't interrupt on the grounds that he's clapped.
I don't think we're gonna wed. I mean,
That's fine.
Yeah, he's got a weird combination of like being really into the Vote Leave campaign and loving working with like real high up Tories, like feeling like really excited when he's in the same room as Dominic Cummings.
So why is he now blowing the whistle?
So what happened was he was part of Believe, and Believe was the Leave online group that was trying to get young people to vote Leave, because obviously the Leave campaign knew they had a image that was quite white and was quite old. Stilton
is what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's a kind of Stilton image, and they wanted to give it a little bit of Dairy Lee.
Ooh.
Yeah, but less white.
Okay.
so they wanted to appeal to young people, potentially from ethnic minorities. And he said himself that's one of the reasons they were so keen to get him in, because he was keen. Young lad, Asian. And so they're advertising on social media to people that they've identified as being progressive and showing them images of the fact that the EU discriminates against non-European people, things like that.
All true.
All true, yeah. And it was supposed to be quite successful. This guy's got upset. Well, not upset, it's a bit belittling, isn't it? This guy's come out because he was concerned about what was going on, because the 2 official campaigns in the referendum, Vote Leave and what were Remain called? Better Together?
No, Better Together, yeah.
No, that was Scotland. Remain.
Stronger In.
Stronger In.
Oh, God, terrible.
So Stronger. They both had spending limits of £7 million. But any other group, any separate group campaigning on the referendum could spend up to 700k. So what happened was Vote Leave, they got close to the £7 million. They wanted to spend a little bit more money, fundamentally.
So they set up some front organisations.
Yeah, well, so they donated extra money to Believe, but the money they donated to Believe went straight to their data analytics company in Canada. And also, these companies can only spend 700k if they're completely separate from the main campaign. So you have to show that you didn't collude. Believe had to show that they didn't collude with Vote Leave to be able to spend that 700k without going over the spending limits.
And so Vote Leave is saying there was no collusion.
Yeah.
And
this guy's saying there was clear collusion.
You know, Jawline McGee is coming out saying, well, we were sharing desks. Like, what more do you want?
Yeah.
Like, we were...
And he has an image of them all of one of the executives from Vote Leave going through the day after, actually, or I think the week after an investigation is launched into this funding. She's going through their shared Google Drive and deleting the names of all Google executives from every single not Google, all Vote Leave executives from every document.
From the Google Drive.
Which he can see in the file of history.
Oh my
So that's
God.
the moment in the story. That's the moment when he was like, wow, this is totally wrong. He goes on about how much he loves British values, but he thinks that British values are about like fairness. And so this has, that's kind of what I was thinking when I watched it.
Just like British values are about fairness. I'm like, have you heard of the Opium Wars, my friend?
Well, it's funny because there's him who was obviously like quite naive, but also a little bit right wing, saying, like British values is about fairness, etc. And then there's these like Guardian hyper-liberals being like, yeah, British values is about fairness. And the referendum was so unfair. And then sort of like they're all agreeing in this sort of like
strange,
slightly
dissonant way.
naive mush in the middle.
But that's not even the wildest part of this story.
What's the wildest part?
The wildest part of the story is that this guy got outed
Oh yeah.
by number 10.
Yeah, that's pretty poor.
It's awful. Really awful. So what was it? Number 10 crafted a statement to the press in which they quoted someone who had been going out with, high top fade for like 18 months. So could not have known that he wasn't out and then quoted him. Is that what happened?
Yes, I don't know what number 10 statement is on whether or not the dude knew the high fade guy was out. So the guy is, we should have got his name. I think he's Stephen something. Anyway, he's currently one of Theresa May's political advisors. He also worked for the Vote Leave campaign. And he's saying that the Vote Leave campaign wasn't actually working with Believe. I was just dating this guy and he kind of got the impression we were working together. But actually, we were just sleeping together for 18 months. And like, he's totally naive and didn't really understand what was going on.
Between working together in a political capacity when you're sleeping with someone. Because it's not like when you're hooking up with someone. I mean, I don't know. I'm not an expert. I'm very repressed and happy about it. No one's like whipped out an Excel spreadsheet to spice things up.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, well, it's also like you never think you're like, oh yeah, no, I work at YouTube. No, the guy I'm sleeping with works at.
Yeah.
You don't just mix that up. And also,
like for instance, I don't think that I'm defending a heavyweight boxing title this Saturday just because Anthony Joshua is my future husband. You see, distinctions.
Yeah, distinctions. That'd be sick. That would be a good Guardian expose.
What if I was actually Anthony Joshua's trainer?
Yeah, that'd be
great.
Sick. I follow him on Twitter, and he does some
a love
real
story
good
for the
first
ages.
picks.
And see, that's what I mean by being discerning in my thirst. It's Anthony Joshua's.
Oh, you're not that discerning. Come on.
Oh my god.
No, but I just mean like anyone but Anthony Joshua. What are you talking about?
I am that discerning. I'm saving myself for Anthony Joshua.
All right.
It's true.
Anyway, what do you make of the idea that this changes our perspective of how we look at the referendum and the referendum result? The fact that it looks in all likelihood like Leave did break election spending rules. Should we care?
I mean, how much money do you have to pay to make this country racist? Out of curiosity.
Well, interestingly, less money than it would take to keep Britain in.
Well, there you go.
I'm not actually, by the way, I'm also not agreeing with the whole idea that the Leave campaign actually was racist. I don't think everyone who voted Brexit was.
I don't think that everyone who voted for Brexit was racist, but I think all racists voted for Brexit. And I think that the ideas around sovereignty and control that were summoned, and particular I was thinking about it. And so on Thursday, we'll be dropping this little mini documentary that I made in Keighley and Bradford. Spoke to loads of really, really lovely people. And kind of afterwards on the train home, I was reflecting on the genius of the campaigning slogan, Take Back Control. What was the Remain campaigning slogan?
I have no idea.
There you go. Can't remember it. Can't remember.
Well, Stronger In, but was that the slogan?
That was the like organising group, but
so we don't know what the slogan was.
No. And can you name any one of their core campaign promises?
No.
But everyone can remember 350 million for the NHS.
Yeah, that was a good campaign. It's exactly the same as Hillary. I mean, like the analogues are really strong.
Yeah,
and
right. So no.
The analogues are the same in that people are saying the vote was rigged and unfair because some data company used targeted advertising.
Yeah. And so Take Back Control which I think is complete genius as a phrase. So you think about control and the way in which that's implicitly tied to control of borders. So you've got this kind of like, one-to-one here. Take back, right? So appealing to a past that you once had, glory days. Everyone loved that. And this myth of British self-sufficiency kept coming up again and again in my interviews. Britain used to be self-sufficient. I was like, when it had just lost continental Europe? Before the Tudors? Like when? Because, colonies, like Britain was never self-sufficient. And then take, right? So it's a expression of agency. It's kicking back against the establishment. It's, anti-elitist. So as you string all those sentiments together and you think about it as, rather than a coherent statement on its own, almost like linking together like clouds of balloons, which were all reaching out to something else, complete genius. And that was able to, I think, really effectively coalesce lots of different sentiments, not all of which were racist, but had, I think, origins in kind of post-colonial melancholy, in a sense of things not being right now, so things in the past must have been better, in racialized images of loss of control, and knit them together in a way that was really effective. If you had really stringent spending rules, or even if you abolished Facebook tomorrow, all those things would still be at play, and they'd still be firmly embedded in the public consciousness. So that's why I think all this stuff about... I think Cambridge Analytica is interesting in terms of how Facebook amplifies certain tendencies, and its data model and its revenue model is built in order to do that. I think that's really interesting and really important, but this idea that it would invent results is bullshit. All it can do is build on what's already there.
Yeah.
And that's like 400 years in the making.
Well, Cambridge Analytica also isn't really the story in Brexit. So the Cambridge Analytica connection, which The Guardian made a huge splash about as well,
with the yellow font
was that
stuff.
the Cambridge Analytica files, was that Cambridge Analytica came into the office and gave them sort of like a presentation and a little bit of data, sort of like the trial version where you say, come and work with us, this is the kind of thing we can do. And apparently that should have been put down as a donation in kind, but it just wasn't mentioned. So, I mean, that's super small fry.
Yeah.
The issue is breaking these spending laws. But and I do think they should make the law stronger in terms of enforcing election financing laws, because it's obviously very important how much money can you use to try and get your argument across, and how much does that stack the odds against any movement that doesn't have money. That's why America's awful, because they don't have any campaign financing laws. So we should make those stronger. It seems like at the moment what people do is they say, well, take a risk, fuck it. Once the results come in, the results have come in, which is what the Tories did in 2015. It's obviously what Leave did. But Remain spent more than Leave. So Remain spent £19.3 million. Obviously not the Remain campaign. So the Remain campaign spent under £7 million, but all the different Remain campaigning groups put together spent £19.3 million, and Leave spent £13.4 million. And that's not including the government leaflet that cost £9 million to send to the whole country, which was telling them the government thinks you should remain. So I
can't remember anything about that.
If the odds were stacked against anyone, to be fair, it probably was Leave. So just as with Hillary Clinton in America, these centrists and these liberals need to think of the actual reasons why people didn't buy their project, instead of trying to come up with some conspiracy about why it was all fixed.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, go on.
If for some reason, I don't know, Chukwuemeka was prime minister or something, and there was a second referendum, how would you vote?
I was thinking about this morning. So I think it would depend a lot on what the deal was that was on offer. I'd certainly be quite uncomfortable campaigning for Remain. I think at the moment, the risk of there being a second referendum, one is that I think it would be quite divisive, and it's not going to heal the wounds that we have in Britain. But in all practical purposes, the referendum would either be take the Tories' bad deal, Remain, or Leave on WTO terms. And I think all those three options are going to be really bad, and none of those three options are going to mobilise ordinary people on the left in a way that's positive. I mean, this is the leadership. This is the strategy of the leadership of the Labour Party, which is to say that the division between Remain and Leave is not useful for the left. It's not about progressives versus reactionaries. That's not how that division works.
I agree.
What we want to talk about is the many versus the few, and Remain versus Leave is not the many versus the few. So I don't want a referendum for that reason. I don't think it would be politically useful for anyone on the left.
But how would you vote?
How would I vote? I might abstain.
You might abstain.
No, I'd probably make a decision at the end. I don't know. It'd depend what campaign was better. It depends who sent me the best leaflet. Actually, it'd probably depend on who sent me the best personalised ad.
Yeah?
Yeah. So if
Best
someone was like...
targeted ad.
Yeah, if we Remain... what would they have to... You know me well. How would you sell it to me? What would you put on a targeted
How would
ad?
I sell it to you?
For Remain.
For Remain, a free gym membership at that one in Holborn.
Ooh. That would save me £30 a month.
It would.
Oh, I would. I would, yeah. But I don't know how they're going to offer that. I don't know how Remaining would get me £30 a month
We'd
off
have
my
to
gym
loosen
membership.
up like election spending rules or something.
But it would be banging.
But it would.
This
This is why I should be in charge of political campaigns. I know
should-
what offers the people want.
You should be in charge of political campaigns.
Whereas if like Leave had offered me a Twix, that would be enough for me to jettison all my critiques of colonialism. I'd be like, well, there we go. A Twix is a Twix.
Do you think, because you were quite for Remain, presumably, right? Well, you were quite anti-Leave.
I was very anti-Leave, which wasn't the same as being for Remain.
Do you think that any of the Lexit people have been proved correct?
I don't think that Lexit has been proved correct. I think that the strategy of the Labour Party has been proved to be effective.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to spoil the findings from the video, but one of the things that I did find in chatting to people in Keighley and in Bradford is that support for Jeremy Corbyn spanned age, it spanned ethnicity, and it spanned both sides of EU referendum voting. So that's something that's really encouraging. They didn't feel that Jeremy Corbyn alienated them in any way through his either campaigning during the referendum or policy now, despite what the Owen Smiths of the world might say, is that people who very passionately felt that we should remain in the EU didn't feel alienated. So I think that that was the right decision. In terms of, do I think that Lexit are correct on other things? Well, one of my main beefs is about migration. And I think that one of the things which is kind of asleep in the Labour Party, or like a rumbling tension, so a bit like tectonic plates, and maybe, you won't know until something, rupturing happens, is that I think that there is an assumption with some key figures close to the leadership that central to any socialist strategy when in government will be having to have an artificial stranglehold on Labour so that you can push up wages and conditions by restricting migration, which is shonky economics, but I think is a very strong tendency in British socialism especially. And I think that that's something which, if we leave that political antagonism to be articulated through Brexit or the limitations of freedom of movement, then as anti-racists, as people who want a progressive migration policy, we're going to lose it. So we need to find different ways of articulating that. And I don't feel that Lexiters have adequately dealt with that question. And I think that's why I remain to be convinced about Lexit. Even though I don't think we should have a second referendum necessarily. Although maybe I do sometimes. I don't think that we should, because I don't think it will go well. I want a referendum for the banter sometimes. I just don't think it will go well.
My issue with the Owen Smith lot is that, and I had an argument with Wes Streeting on Twitter about it on the weekend, is that I think they are, whereas what the Labour leadership are trying to do is trying to bring people together. So they're saying there's a division in the country that's not a very productive. It's quite useful to have a division in society between the masses and the elites, as long as it doesn't end up in crazy conspiracy land. But as long I was going
to be like the 1930s offer some very cogent lessons about how that can go wrong.
As long as that's based in a decent political education and that idea of who the elite are is the correct one, which is
not racialized.
Not racialized, yeah. But between Leavers and Remainers, it's not useful. And what Leavers are trying to do, or what the Rees-Moggs, what the Tory right are trying to do, is start a culture war where they say anything other than hard Brexit is a betrayal. What the Labour right are trying to do is say anything other than complete Remain second referendum is a betrayal. And they're both basically telling lies to their groups. So what the Labour right are doing is saying, if we don't stay in the single market, the Good Friday Agreement's going to be out the window.
Yeah.
And there are people who've done so the IPPR did a whole report about the shared market, which is saying we can leave the single market, we can have an open border between Northern and Southern Ireland, and that people who are looking for a solution where you can leave and have a situation which is acceptable to both sides and not catastrophic, they're finding it. But there's people on two sides that don't want to find it. And what I think is politics in 2018 is you've got the Tory right that want a culture war and they want to win it. And they probably would if they managed to start it. The Labour right who want to start a culture war and they want to lose it because they think if they lose it, then they'll be able to take over the Labour Party in the next 5 years. You've got Theresa May who has, to be honest, no idea what she wants to do.
She's just
kind of
stuffed
wants
to the gills with beta blockers.
Yeah,
so.
just wants to stick to her job and wants to keep her job. And then you got Corbyn who wants to build a society for the many, not the few. To sound a little bit cheesy there.
Yeah, I was going to be like...
I'm glad I picked my side. I'm glad I picked my side.
Literally like a Seamus Milne at the, pulling the strings or something.
Pulling... Oh.
Okay.
Not
racialised. I mean, in an innocuous marionette kind of way.
Final question, and then I think we're going to end. I might have a look at a few of the questions on YouTube while you're answering. Did you see today, or it was maybe yesterday, Ipsos Mori polling that said that the British public's concerns about migration have gone significantly down since the referendum?
That doesn't surprise me at all. I think that most people think that the issue of immigration has been dealt with by the referendum result, which I think tells us something about where that vote was coming from. And in terms of legitimate concerns about immigration, is that that's a mediatized phenomenon. It's not one based on people's material circumstances necessarily. So yes, EU migration's fallen to a record low of around 90,000. This is from numbers released in September. But non-EU migration's gone up to 205,000. So, that's gone up as well. So, certain kinds of migration have gone down, other kinds of migration have gone up. And for immigration to kind of slide off people's list of concerns, that, again, it shows us that it's a cultural and a mediatized phenomenon rather than a material one. In terms of what does that mean for anti-immigrant sentiment in this country, I would urge caution against thinking that presenting a progressive economic platform is all you need to mitigate against the allure of nationalism or xeno-racism, to borrow that wonderful phrase from Sivanandan. And I think that one of the questions that we should ask ourselves is, how do we win over the votes and indeed the faith of racist voters and challenge them at the same time? And I don't know how you go about doing that. I probably alienate a lot more people than I win over. So we need some more charming and perhaps less abrasive anti-racists to do that work.
All right, let's look at some of these questions. Who do you fancy for post-Corbyn leadership? Way too early for that, Fisherman Fred.
Me.
Ash Sarkar, because it's going to be in 10 years' time or something. You'll be shadow cabinet by then. No, cabinet by then, I'm sure.
I'll be Chancellor by then. Doesn't matter that I can't count to 10.
How vital is Corbyn to the Left project? Would you drop the guy if these controversies were to inhibit Labour's chances at the next general election?
I think as it stands, there isn't a Left project without Corbyn. And that's a problem, is that there's this bottleneck when it comes to getting Left talent into the PLP, which I think is, there's a sense of tenuousness or precarity.
I don't think there's any reason to replace him. I mean, there's this comment under the mural is one example where there's actually a fuck up, but he's apologized. People make fuck ups. Most of the smears against him, most of the things against him have been smears, which most of the population have seen to be as such. So I think he is the best placed person to win.
I'm saying in general, it's not healthy to have a Left project hinge on one person.
Yeah.
And I do worry. I'm like, is it someone's job to inject him with stem cells every day?
No, he's a vegetarian and he runs. So I think he's going to live a little while. Someone asked me why I don't like critical theory.
Why don't you like critical theory?
I think the words are so long. It's a bit difficult to read. And I just prefer to read stuff that's a lot more empirical.
Like
than
Twitter.
Sort of like Twitter, but also... I did political sociology, which is all big questions about class structure and sort of how democracies develop and welfare state, blah, blah, blah. But you don't it's not that you can explain it to anyone in 5 minutes. It's not Deleuze. Yeah, I don't like Deleuze and Guattari. It's a doorstop. It's a pretentious doorstop. Right, one last question and then we'll go. Will we have 4 referendums per year like direct democracy, Swiss?
One, I fucking hope not. Oh my God. Can you imagine how long and annoying that would be? And also for all those referendums, don't forget, and this is something which I think people need to think really carefully about when they're talking about that form of direct democracy, is that some of us have to confect opinions for them. And I don't have that much time in my life right now. I can't be fucked. Also, that's been a avenue for racist policies to, make it, like the ban on minarets and stuff. So I think that direct democracy without an otherwise robust culture of political debate, of political education, of grassroots empowerment in terms of dictating the direction of policy outside these moments at the ballot box, I think can be dangerous.
I'm just going to say, I can't believe that you have the cheek to say that you don't like forming and expressing opinions. Oh, poor me. Every time there's an election, I have to express opinions.
I hate it. I hate it. It's all a front, man.
It's all a front.
Zero,
just for the people sliding in your DMs.
Literally,
might be good for Navarra fundraising for referendums a year.
Or for referendums.
Like every time we can sort of say, if it's a big topic every time.
Okay, so maybe a little bit racism in exchange for better Navarra funding. Is this?
Well, you're assuming the referendums are going to be racist. I mean, we could have referendums with decriminalizing drugs would maybe be one of the first ones.
Oh, that would be sick, wouldn't it?
So that's in the US, decriminalizing drugs has mainly come via referendums because it's a policy that's actually quite popular, but none of the major political parties
named one non-racist one. You've named one
to do it.
Non-racist one.
Gay marriage got through in some of the states via that. I think
then it got taken away again.
Got taken away by some referendums. But I mean, we have to do.
So thinking about how you embed these things politically is really important. I mean,
it'd be fucking tiring, that's for sure.
Yeah, I'm not up for it.
All right. We're not down for 4 referendums a year because we can't be asked.
Yeah. Laziness.
Yeah, laziness. So on that note, we are gonna go and chill, aren't we? Gonna relax.
I'm going home.
You're gonna go home?
Yeah.
Sick. I'm not. I'm just gonna stay here till Thursday until the next episode of TyskySour. See you then. Thank you so much for joining us, Ash, especially at the last minute. You're a star.
Apologies to Aaron Bassani because I stole his seat.
Oh, he should communicate better on WhatsApp.
He should communicate better on WhatsApp. Tweet us next time, yeah, Bassano.
Yeah. He's good. He's better on Twitter, actually, isn't he?
I feel we're talking too much now.
All right. Bye-bye. Ha ha ha!